Well, I am the regional director for the Central Oklahoma Alzheimer's Association, and I've been in this position since February of 2005. And our office is responsible for providing support and services to everybody, basically from I-35 to the western border of the state. And so we serve a very large population of Oklahomans who are facing the challenges of Alzheimer's disease, as well as trying to educate the overall public just about what the disease is and what kind of challenges people face.
What is the disease? Talk about the various stages of dementia and Alzheimer's, just the basics of Alzheimer's. What is it? What does it do? The stages, things like that.
It's important for people to understand that Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging. Alzheimer's is a disease. It's a disease of the brain. And more specifically, it causes atrophy of the brain. And as the brain shrinks, then the functions of the brain become significantly impaired to the point to where the neurons can't fire accurately, can't fire the way they're supposed to, and in the process, the abilities for an individual with Alzheimer's decreases. It's not just their memory, but it's in all aspects of who they are. Their ability to communicate, their ability to take care of themselves, all the way down to their ability to breathe, and eventually leads to death. And so that's something we want to make sure that people understand that this is a disease that is deadly. It's the 7th leading cause of death in America, and it's important for people to understand just how much impact that this disease has.
Talk about how many people in Oklahoma, what is the forecast in Alzheimer's in Oklahoma? The situation is now, and what's the forecast for the future?
Well, the Census Bureau in 2000 found that there were 62,000 Oklahomans who were living with Alzheimer's at that time. That has since increased to be in excess of 70,000 Oklahomans. And to put that into perspective, that almost fills up OU's football stadium on game day. And by the year 2030, the projections show that we will have 96,000 Oklahomans who have Alzheimer's. And so that's a very large jump in just 3 decades. It's almost a 55% jump from 2000 to 2030.
Why is that happening? Be specific about why the numbers are going to be going up quite a bit. Explain the specifics of that.
Well, I think there are 2 things. Number one, we are living longer as a society. The medical community has become so adept at keeping us being able to address issues, health issues that we have, that we're living longer. And the number one risk of developing Alzheimer's is age. And so if we're living longer, then it's more likely we're going to develop the disease. Also, probably the biggest factor into this growth, this boom of how many people who are going to be living with Alzheimer's is the fact that we have a very large baby boomer population. There's 78 million baby boomers across the country, and they're all right now on the doorstep of getting to an age where it becomes a much greater risk.
What are the symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia? And are they the same for everybody? Are they different for each individual? But what are the symptoms?
Well, the one that's most common is memory loss. And so the ability to short-term memory is always the first thing that people notice. The ability to lay down new memories is the challenge that everybody recognizes, the symptom that everybody recognizes. But it's more than that. Those who develop the disease, as time goes on, they will their ability just to understand things that have always been a regular part of their life. They get confused more easily. They may mix and match names and faces, and so there's a whole list of symptoms. The first one that everybody's going to recognize is the fact that memory loss becomes a very noticeable aspect of the disease.
How does that lead to death, though? How does Alzheimer's lead to somebody dying from that?
Well, we have this wonderful computer basically inside our head, and as the disease develops and as the brain shrinks, the brain can no longer function the way it needs to. It can no longer tell our body how to fight infection, how to do all those things, because right now, if we have an infection, the body the brain will tell the body we need to send certain blood cells to go and fight those sorts of things. And as our brain loses its capacity for executive thought, for all kinds of things, as it dwindles away and atrophies, then the brain's ability to help help us stay healthy and communicate to others that we are feeling poorly, that becomes more of an issue. And so it actually, people will say, well, my loved one died of complications, died from pneumonia. They didn't die from Alzheimer's. The reality is that they are dying from Alzheimer's. The pneumonia starts because of the brain's inability to help the body fight the infection and the disease.
What are the myths surrounding Alzheimer's? Misconceptions. I'm sure there are plenty. What don't they understand about it? What are the myths about what Alzheimer's is and what it does?
Well, first and foremost is that it's just a normal part of aging, and that's something that just happens to us as we grow older, and that's not true. I've known people who developed Alzheimer's when they were in their 60s and 70s and eventually died of the disease. My grandmother, right now, she's 91 years old, and she is sharp as a tack. And so it's not something that is just a part of aging. And so that's myth number one, that it really is a disease that we develop. Number two is that it only affects those who are older adults. And that's not all true. There's 5.2 million Americans currently living with Alzheimer's disease. About 10% of those are under the age of 65. And so it's not something that only affects those who are later in life. The Alzheimer's Association has come in contact with families who have loved ones who are in their 50s, their 40s, and even in their 30s who are currently facing the challenges of the disease.
What is the current treatment for Alzheimer's? Is there anything that can be done from a treatment standpoint?
Treatment in the symptoms. Right now, the medications that are out there, it treats the symptoms of the disease. There's nothing that is disease modifying at this time. And so that is what we're looking forward to, is the development in the research field, to be able to come up with treatments that are going to actually alter the disease and change the disease. And so right now, it's the medications that are available. They're not great, but they can be effective for some. It's not 100% that everybody's going to benefit from those. And so it's important for people to be diagnosed as early as possible, to get onto the medications as early as possible, and from there we're hopeful. There's no guarantee.
What is in the research pipeline for Alzheimer's? I know there's a tremendous amount of research being done. Tell me specifically what is, again, in that research pipeline, and what kind of hopes does it show?
Sure. Well, about 80% of what we know of Alzheimer's has been discovered over the last 15 years. So there is a tremendous amount of momentum in Alzheimer's research, and that's exciting. For a drug to go from the discovery phase all the way through the FDA trials, only about 1 in 5 ever actually make it through that entire process. That being the case, right now there are 5 drugs that are in phase 3 of the FDA trials. We are hopeful at this time that at least one of those will be successful, and that we'll be able to get it to market here in the next 2 to 3 years. That's what we're hopeful of.
What would those do? What would those drugs do? I know there's been talk about a vaccine for Alzheimer's. How far in the future are we looking, and how effective can these drugs be?
The drugs can be effective. At this time, the ones that are right there at the end of the FDA trials, in the phase 3, they most likely are going to be drugs that slow down the progression of the disease better than what we already have. Ideally, one of them may be able to arrest the progression, that would stop the progression altogether. Hopefully, at some point in time, to be able to reverse the effects of the disease. Don't know if that's possible, but we do feel very confident that there's going to be something coming out over the next decade or so that is going to be something that changes the way the disease is looked at, because it's going to be much more effective in being able to either slow down the progression or stop the progression altogether. As far as a vaccine, it's very difficult to say. When people think of vaccines, a lot of times they think of the polio vaccine. And we don't know exactly if that's going to be possible, but that's something that we are striving for. With the Alzheimer's Association, we are here to put ourselves out of business. And what we want to do is to advance research to find a cure. It is our hope to have to close our doors and go find something else to do because there's no more disease to fight.
What would you tell an Oklahoma family that has a relative that is showing these signs of Alzheimer's? What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, be aware and to not just treat it as grandpa is getting older. Because the reality is, if they're dealing with the disease and it's early, and get them diagnosed as early as possible. If you had a loved one who had, showed some signs of possibly having skin cancer, you would want them to go and get it diagnosed as soon as possible. And we feel the same way about Alzheimer's. So get them diagnosed first and foremost. And secondly, we want them to understand that there is support out there for not only the individuals who have the disease, but for the families who are facing the everyday challenges of Alzheimer's.
What are those support organizations, and how can people get help through your organization or any support groups? What can you offer? What is out there?
The Alzheimer's Association facilitates support groups all across the state. And here in the Oklahoma City area, we have about 15 to 20 here in the Metroplex support groups that can offer support to family members who are facing the everyday challenges of this disease. We have care consultations where people can come in, a family can come in and sit down with someone from our staff and talk about their specific situation. It's a service that's completely free of charge. We also have a 24-hour helpline where we can provide information to them and plug them into the information that they need. We're a referral service.
And how can people get that? How can they get plugged in?
The best way to do is just give the Alzheimer's Association a call at 800-272-3900.
And on a website?
alz.org.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim.
We'll go over.